The winter of 1887 descended upon the northern Texas mountains like a shroud of infinite sorrow, painting the rugged landscape in stark, unforgiving whites. The craggy limestone peaks, once vibrant with life, became silent, frozen sculptures, isolated in their stark grandeur. The wind, a mournful lament, whistled through the skeletal pine branches, carrying not just the bite of the cold, but also the whispered premonition of an impending doom. In this harsh, unyielding embrace of nature, Emma's family farm lay nestled in a secluded valley, a tenacious speck of life, a humble fortress of wood and enduring hope. Emma, 23, with her lustrous chestnut hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes the color of amber that held a peculiar, unwavering stillness, worked alongside her father, stacking firewood. She spoke little, yet every movement was precise, deliberate, imbued with a quiet strength, much like the ancient oak tree that stood sentinel against the blizzards, its roots deeply anchored in the unyielding soil dot as dusk bled across the sky. Painting the horizon in bruised purples and somber grays, it heralded a long, frigid night. Then, the silence was brutally torn asunder. The thunderous drumming of hooves, like the death knell of a relentless army, shattered the evening's peace. The sharp metallic crack of gunfire echoed through the valley, a sound as jarring as lightning striking bare earth. 3 shadowy figures, mounted on horses as black as sin, cloaked in dust-laden coats and hats pulled low, burst into the farmyard. They were horse thieves, specters of the lawless frontier, carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder, the stench of horse sweat, and an unbridled savagery in their wake. Emma was ripped from her father's grasp, the icy kiss of a rifle barrel pressed against her temple, stealing her breath, freezing it in her lungs. Terror surged through her like a tidal wave from the deepest ocean, engulfing every sense, rendering her mute. She did not scream, did not fight, only stood in silent horror. Her eyes watched her father fall, a dark stain spreading across the pristine white snow. In that singular, shattering moment, her world splintered into 1,000 fragments, and she was swept away, a withered leaf caught in a merciless whirlwind. Destined for the unknown, among the 3 outlaws, there was one who was different, a stark, unsettling contrast. He spoke no words, offered no cruel laughter, nor made any unnecessary gestures, merely observing the unfolding chaos with a detached stillness. His eyes, shadowed beneath the wide brim of his hat, held a profound sorrow, as if they contained entire storms that had long since passed, rains that had drenched his very soul. This was Caleb. He did not touch Emma, not even an accidental brush, simply gestured for her to mount a horse with a slight nod. She did not look at him, nor at any of them. Her gaze was fixed behind her, where flames had begun to lick at the familiar wooden roof of her home, where her life had just been consumed by fire and reduced to ashes. That night, she rode with them, through the relentless, heavy snowfall, the icy flakes clinging to her face, a lost soul adrift in a labyrinth of despair and bone-chilling cold. The first night bled into dawn, marked by the howling wind, a famished beast, and the biting cold that pierced through every layer of clothing. They made camp in a secluded rock overhang, where jagged stones formed a natural, albeit meager, shelter. A small fire was coaxed to life, its flickering glow a desperate attempt to ward off the penetrating cold, but it only managed to cast a weak circle of light amidst the deep, encroaching darkness. The other 2 outlaws, a burly man with a thick, matted beard that obscured most of his face and a gaunt, squint-eyed one, cackled coarsely, dividing their spoils. Their crude laughter and vulgar remarks echoed in the cavern, amplifying the disgust churning in Emma's stomach. They tossed her a piece of hard, dried meat and some foul water, treating her as if she were a worthless animal. She remained motionless, curled into herself, trying to make her presence as small as possible, as though she wished to dissolve into the shadows, to become one with the cold, unfeeling rock, Caleb, the taciturn man, sat opposite her, a distance, maintained that prevented intimacy, yet close enough for her to sense his presence, a presence that felt distinctly different. He uttered no words, merely roasted a piece of meat over the fire, his movements slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. When the meat was golden brown, emitting a faint, savory aroma into the frigid air, he did not eat it. Instead, he gently placed it beside her, along with a worn, patched wool blanket that still held a faint warmth. He did not look at her, not gesture, simply acted as if it were the most natural thing, an act requiring no explanation. Emma's eyes drifted to the meat, then to the blanket, and finally, her gaze settled on Caleb's back as he turned away, resuming his solitary vigil. She said nothing, moved nothing. The fear remained, a colossal iceberg lodged in her chest, yet something small, fragile as a snowflake touching warm skin. A faint flicker of warmth had begun to stir within her. That night, she did not touch the meat. Her throat remained choked by grief and terror. But she did pull the blanket over herself. The warmth from the old wool blanket not only chased away the external chill, but also offered a tender balm to the numbness in her soul, a gentle sedative. She lay there, listening to the wind howl outside the cavern, the crackle of the fire, and the crude snores of the two outlaws. Caleb remained seated, still and silent, like a statue carved from stone, his eyes fixed on the flames, yet seemingly gazing into a distant, unseen world, a place only he could perceive. The silence between them was not the silence of hostility or estrangement, but the profound quiet of two lost souls, each burdened by their own unspoken story, their own private weight. The following days unfolded into a grueling, monotonous journey through snow-choked trails, paths that led deeper into the heart of the mountains. Emma was loosely bound to her saddle, enough to allow movement, but insufficient for escape. She knew that in this bone-chilling cold and unforgiving wilderness, escape meant certain death. She began to observe, cautiously and meticulously. She watched how the other two outlaws interacted, their crude jokes, their mocking laughter, their inherent brutality even towards each other. And she watched Caleb. Caleb never participated in their vulgar conversations or their crude jests. He always rode behind, or slightly apart, a solitary shadow, detached from their world. When they stopped to rest, he was always the one to build the fire, to search for dry wood beneath the snow, and to prepare their meager meals with a quiet diligence. He did everything silently, without complaint, without seeking recognition. Once, when Emma, weak from hunger and cold, her vision blurring, nearly fell from her horse, he swiftly reached out, steadying her reins, preventing a painful tumble onto the sharp, icy rocks. He said nothing, merely offered a brief nod, his eyes sweeping over her with a fleeting concern, a rare flicker of humanity, before returning to their customary melancholy. Like a formidable, unbreachable wall, Emma began to notice the small details, the disparate pieces that slowly formed a different picture of this man. When the other two were engrossed in their whiskey and cards, their boisterous laughter echoing in the night, Caleb would sit apart, meticulously cleaning his rifle, or simply gazing up at the star-dusted sky, as if searching for something long lost. On one occasion, she saw him gently stroking a wounded sparrow he found in a thicket, then carefully placing it in a warm rock crevice, his eyes surprisingly tender. He was unlike the others. There was no cruelty in his gaze, no contempt in his gestures. He carried a profound solitude, a deep-seated sorrow like an old, unhealing scar, a burden he seemed destined to bear. Emma did not look at him with the eyes of a captive, but as though they were both imprisoned by their own memories, by the invisible shackles that life had placed upon each of them, the shackles of past and loss. One morning, as the snow ceased falling and a weak, watery sunlight pierced through the tree canopy, casting faint, ethereal streaks across the white landscape. The two outlaws grew restless, their faces etched with impatience. They spoke of leaving the mountains, of finding warmer climes to spend their ill-gotten gains. Emma overheard them discussing her fate. One suggested selling her to a brothel in the nearest town, his voice thick with lechery. The other proposed killing her to tie up loose ends, his eyes as cold and sharp as a blade. Fear surged again, colder than the winter itself, an ultimate dread dot as the two outlaws went to scout the path ahead. Caleb approached Emma. He knelt, facing her, his eyes meeting hers directly for the first time, without evasion. And Emma saw the sorrow in his eyes more clearly now, the profound grief of a man who had endured too much loss. "You can go," he said, his voice hoarse, as if unused, each word seemingly carved from the depths of his soul. "I'll tell them you escaped in the night. They won't suspect." Emma stared at him, disbelieving. Was this a trap? A cruel jest of fate? She didn't know whether to trust him. The fear of deception, of betrayal, was even greater than the fear of captivity. It gnawed at her mind. She did not answer, merely watched him, trying to decipher the unspoken meaning in his gaze, searching for a flicker of hope, a sign of sincerity. Caleb did not press her. He simply rose silently, turned his back, and walked towards the horses, leaving her with the agonizing choice. That night, a ferocious blizzard descended without warning, like a furious outburst of nature's wrath. The wind howled like a wounded wild beast, and snow fell thick and fast, obscuring all visibility, turning the world into an endless expanse of white. They were forced to take shelter in a small cave, where the biting cold still seeped into every crevice. The frigid temperatures and the chaos of the storm made everything terrifying. The two outlaws panicked, struggling to keep the fire alive, but the flames flickered precariously, threatening to die out, weak against the might of nature. Caleb remained remarkably calm, using his body to shield the fire, and Emma, forming a fragile yet resilient barrier. Then, a guttural growl echoed, tearing through the wind's shriek. A hungry wolf, driven close by the storm, its green eyes gleaming in the darkness, lunged into the cave. Caleb reacted with lightning speed. He drew his pistol, but in the darkness and confusion, he slipped on the damp rock floor. The wolf sprang at him, baring its sharp fangs, snarling. Emma watched it all unfold, her fear transforming into a choked scream that wouldn't escape her throat. Caleb wrestled with the wolf, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he would die, thought all hope was lost. He came perilously close to death. But finally, a dry, sharp gunshot rang out, a deafening sound in the confined space, and the wolf collapsed, its last breath escaping in a mournful whine. Caleb lay there, gasping, a deep, bleeding gash on his arm, but he was alive. The blizzard raged for 3 days, trapping them within the frigid cave, a natural prison. Caleb was gravely wounded. The wolf's claw mark had become infected, swelling painfully, and he began to burn with a high fever, drifting in and out of consciousness. The other two outlaws cared little. They were consumed by their own concerns, their stolen riches, and viewed Caleb as nothing more than a burden. Emma watched Caleb, his face pale with fever, his breathing shallow and labored. Something within her had shifted, an invisible wall had crumbled. Fear had given way to a more powerful urge, the desperate need to save a life that had once saved hers. She said nothing, merely tore a strip of fabric from her dress, dipped it in cold water from a melted snow puddle, and placed it on his forehead, trying to bring down the fever. She searched for the wild herbs she knew from her farm, plants that stubbornly grew even in the snow, chewed them into a paste, and applied it to his wound, hoping it would staunch the bleeding and prevent further infection. She tended to him like a mother caring for her child, or a sister nursing her brother, without a hint of hesitation or revulsion. Caleb, in his delirium, sometimes mumbled strange names, fragmented memories of a lifelong past, flickering images of war and devastating loss die as the fever slowly receded, and his eyes grew clearer. Caleb awoke. He looked at Emma, his eyes no longer holding their perpetual sorrow, but a profound surprise, a deep gratitude, as though he had been granted a second chance at life. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice weak, yet filled with a raw curiosity. Emma did not answer immediately. She simply looked at him, at the scar on his arm, at the beads of sweat still clinging to his brow, then gently shook her head. "You saved me," she said, her voice a soft whisper in the wind. "And you are not like them." That night, by the flickering firelight, shadows dancing on the cave walls, Caleb began to speak. His voice was low, slow, like the wind sighing through dry branches, carrying the weight of painful memories. He had been a soldier, fighting in the Civil War, a conflict that had stolen so much. He had witnessed horrors, endured irreparable losses, scenes that haunted his every waking moment. He had once had a wife, a small daughter, a happy family, but the war had taken them all, leaving nothing but ashes and despair. He survived, but his soul had died with them, rotting in hopelessness. He wandered, adrift, like a ship without a harbor, and eventually he was drawn into the life of outlaws, not out of malice, but because he had nowhere else to go, no one left to care for, no purpose left to pursue. Emma listened, never interrupting, never offering empty platitudes. She did not comfort, did not judge. She simply listened, and her silence was the greatest comfort, an unconditional acceptance. In that cold, desolate cave, between two people who had once been adversaries, an invisible bond was forged, not by words, but by understanding, by the shared scars of life, by the profound pain they had both endured. The blizzard lifted, but the air remained heavy, pregnant with the promise of change. The two outlaws returned, their faces etched with frustration and suspicion, their eyes sharp as daggers. They had found Caleb and Emma's tracks, and they were not pleased. "Time to deal with the girl," the burly one snarled, his eyes raking over Emma with disgusting lust. "And you, Caleb, you've grown soft, too weak." Caleb rose, the wound on his arm still aching, but his gaze had become resolute, unwavering. He looked at Emma, and in that moment, she knew what he would do, a decision already made. "Let her go," Caleb said, his voice cold, final like a verdict. "Who do you think you are, giving us orders?" The gaunt one sneered, drawing his pistol, his eyes filled with contempt. Without another word, without a moment's hesitation, Caleb drew his own pistol. The gunshot echoed through the forest, shattering the morning's stillness like thunder on a clear day. The two outlaws fell, never comprehending what had happened, their eyes still wide with surprise and rage. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Caleb had betrayed his own, had killed his former companions to save her, to protect the fragile spark of light that had entered his life. "Run!" Caleb grabbed Emma's hand, his grip warm and strong. They fled, crashing through thickets, plunging through deep snow, never looking back. They ran relentlessly, until their breath came in ragged gasps, until their limbs were numb with cold, until they had no strength left. They didn't know where they were going, only that they had to get far away from that place, from the dark past, from the haunting shadows. Finally, as the afternoon sun began to dip, casting long golden shadows, they found an abandoned log cabin, nestled deep in a secluded valley, like a hidden secret. The cabin was old, dilapidated, but it offered shelter, a safe haven from the winter's bite, a temporary home for two lost souls. They lived hidden in that cabin, warming themselves by a crude fire, eating what they could forage from the woods. There were no flowery words, no grand romantic gestures. Only silence, shared burdens, and existence. Emma tended to Caleb's wound, and Caleb protected her from the dangers of the wilderness, from hungry beasts and relentless pursuers. The long winter passed, bringing with it blizzards and endless cold nights, but also an unbreakable bond. In that humble log cabin, something had blossomed, an indefinable warmth, an unspoken love. When the snow finally melted, when the first rays of spring sunlight filtered through the budding leaves, when new life stirred, they stood together, looking out at the world, at an uncertain future. Caleb was a wanted man, a man who had nothing left to lose but his life. Emma was a girl who had lost everything, yet had found something more precious than life itself, a reason to exist. They did not know what the future held. Would they survive? Would they find peace? Would they escape their past? They did not know. But they knew one thing, that winter had changed their lives forever. That winter had brought them together, had bound two lost souls with invisible threads. Of understanding, of trust, and of a love that needed no words. They chose not to leave each other, not out of obligation, but because they had found in each other a part of themselves, a peaceful harbor amidst the storms of life. And in the first light of spring, they walked forward, unaware of tomorrow, but knowing they would not be alone, and that was all they needed.